Thank you, sir. Okay, here we go. Uh, I think that you're going to find that the next 3 weeks there's going to be a lot of information that you probably did not know and had not been exposed to before. So I think you're going to find it pretty intriguing because it's going to fill in a lot of gaps for you on things. So let's see if we can get this going here. Does everybody see the slide that's up? I want to make sure that I'm on.
What it's all about.
Yeah.
Yep. Part 8.
Okay. And there's,
we got the next one.
there's a picture of Frank as a young man. Okay. Now we're going to talk about primarily Armageddon, but we're going to also try to get you lined up with 3 battles or 3 campaigns that are going to be happening in the end times. I don't want you to confuse these. We'll call the first one the Gog-Magog battle. We'll call the second one the Armageddon campaign. And then we'll call the third one the final confrontation, which is after, that one's after the millennium. So somebody read Joel 3:2 for me. It's on the screen.
I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my heritage, Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations and have divided up my land.
Okay. So he says he's going to gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. We're going to identify in just a few minutes where this campaign takes place. It's not just one place. It's not just in Megiddo. It is throughout the valley of Jehoshaphat and all the way down to Petra. So let me give you a scale here. Gog-Magog war, we talked about that one being the battle of the Russian coalition, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, and Ethiopia, and some other Arab nations attacking Israel because they think Israel is a patsy at that particular time. So they are encouraged to do that. Then we go through the tribulation, and in the second half of the tribulation, which is called the Great Tribulation, halfway through that's a 3.5 year period. Halfway through that is where the Armageddon campaign will begin. And what happens is that the nations, the 4 different coalitions or empires or kingdoms or whatever you want to call it, began their movement toward Israel. In the original confrontation, they actually began to conflict with each other before they attack Israel itself. So there's internal battles that are taking place prior to them getting to Israel. And then there'll be a period of time where Jesus returns to them, and then he will do battle. And I'll show you the progression of his meeting these different armies and what happens. Anybody have any questions on what you're seeing on the screen right now, the timeline?
So,
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
I read a commentary here recently that the Armageddon campaign, like you said, you just mentioned there's some conflict within some of these nations that are gathering to invade Israel.
Right.
I read something, unless I misunderstood, that the armies of the East were unsatisfied with the Antichrist and his ruling, and they were in conflict. They came to attack. They came to engage in battle, but then somehow they all decided that they were going to unify and attack Israel just before Christ came. You know, second turn. Second, is that? Am I sort of off base here, or?
No, you're pretty close.
Okay.
What happens, according to what I understand anyway, is that their initial approach is twofold. One is to thwart some of the efforts of the Antichrist, because there's a conflict going on as to his aggressiveness in wanting to be the entire world leader, the global king, so to speak.
Yeah.
So they conflict in that capacity. They do have some skirmishes with each other, and somewhere along the way, they view Israel as the greater evil.
Okay.
And so then they turn their armies toward Israel, and try to wipe them out totally, and finally wipe
Yeah.
out the Jews. And that's when, at that time, is when Christ returns.
Okay.
Okay, that help?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so what is what's the purpose here? And the purpose is that it is about judgment, and God is going to issue judgment upon the nations. That's what it tells us that he's going to do, and he's going to do it for three reasons. One is because of their persecution of Israel. That's Joel 3:2. About their sinfulness among the nations. They are called the nations. And about the total godlessness within the nations. That's the idea of Babylon, the harlot. We read some of that in our studies in Revelation. So Armageddon is a place where God deals in judgment with all of the nations of the world. Okay. And there's three locations that these conflicts are going to be situated. One is Megiddo, and I'll show you on the map where that is. That's west of the Jordan River. It's in the plain of Escadrillon, and it's 10 miles south of Nazareth. So it's in the northern section of Israel. Then in the midsection of Israel, where Jerusalem is the valley of Jehoshaphat, and that's an extended area that's just east of the city of Jerusalem. And that appears in Joel 3:2 and Joel 3:13. And then it will extend itself down to Edom, to where Petra, in the area where Petra is located. So this is a north-south venue that battle is going to be taking place. Any questions on that? All right. This kind of give you a showing here of kind of where that is. Megiddo, being north, is in the area of Galilee. It's between Galilee and Samaria. That's an aerial shot of it down to the right lower section of the screen. You can see the topography there is rugged, and it lends itself to everything being in the valley. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so now let's look at the participants of the campaign. And the reason why I want to make sure I do this for you, is polemos is the word that's used there, and can be translated battle, but in context, it is used as a campaign, which means a series of battles. So in Revelation 16:14, that word appears, and sometimes it's translated battle, sometimes it's campaign, but primarily it's campaign. The term that's used for battle or a single confrontation is Makee. That's the second word that's there. So you have to make sure you know which word it is that's talking about. Otherwise, we get a misnomer here, and that's why at Armageddon, everybody thinks Armageddon is the big conflict where physically the battles, it takes place and all of the armies are in there together and they're going at it. That's not really true, because it's spread out over a 200-mile stretch from north to south. So it's the 10 Kingdom Confederation. That's the Roman Empire led by the Antichrist. The Northern Federation, which is Russia and her allies. This is Russia and her allies being restored and renewed after the Magog battle, which their armies are depleted. Then the kings of the East, that would be China. It's the Asiatic people. Kings of the South or the North African powers. And then, of course, the Lord and his armies that come from heaven. One of the things that, as I was putting all this together, that struck me, that I never really thought about it before, but when Jesus returns on his white horse, he's bringing all of the saints with him that have been in heaven with him. This is after the rapture, of course. And what that means is that he's bringing billions upon billions of people. These are all the saved people of the world that have been with him. And so you think about that, that's pretty vast a number of people.
Yep.
Since Adam and Eve. That's a lot of folks he's going to bring with him. So the battle of that great day of and the reason why I'm saying that is because when you add up the armies of these 10 kingdoms, Northern Federation, kings of the East and kings of the South, you're talking about a standing army of 400 million people. That sounds like a lot of people, but that doesn't stand up to billions and billions of people. So
Yep.
they're going to be somewhat outnumbered.
Outnumbered, yeah.
As they see things. Okay. Now, Saudi Arabia and perhaps some of the other Western nations are going to diplomatically inquire about the Gog-Magog coalition. That's the first battle that we talked about. So what happens is, and you can find that in Ezekiel 38, by the way, they don't do anything about it. Their words are without actions, but they challenge that. Okay. And the reason why that's an important ingredient of that is that they're not in unison together. And so what happens is that Satan sort of wakes up to the fact that they are fragmented, and then he begins to work on those particular nations behind the scenes. And if nothing else, he freezes them. They don't do anything. They become observers rather than defenders. So Saudi Arabia particularly is one of the ones that's mentioned in that. So Israel is going to be vastly and overwhelmingly outnumbered, and the armies that invade them are going to be vastly and overwhelmingly outnumbered also. But in the battle of the Gog Magog, there's no Jesus return with the saints. That's only in the battle of Armageddon. Okay. So Russia and the Muslims go against Israel in the Gog Magog, and the president may be already set. Now that's why I'm jumping from Armageddon to Gog Magog, because I kind of listened to what we said in our discussion in some of these lessons before about do we think that this is happening now, and does that fit into the end times, and where do we place that on the shelf and all? Well, I want you to see how things develop over a period of time, so that the scenario is set. So kind of follow me along here a minute, okay? In 1967, during the 6-day war, Russia was poised to attack Israel with warships, submarines, bombers, and fighter jets. They were countered by the U.S. Sixth Fleet, which was ordered by Johnson into the Mediterranean as a show of solidarity. So in 1967, Russia was poised to invade Israel itself. The 6-day war was going on, the Arabs against Israel. And Russia saw it as an opportunity to encapsulate Israel and to use the Arabs as the point of the spear to take over. That was thwarted by America. In 1973, Israel was attacked by Egypt, Syria, and other Arab Islamic countries. Russia provided the military muscle of weaponry, ammunition, intelligence, and training, very similar to what we're doing in Ukraine right now. So that's in 1973. 1982, Menachem Begin reveals a massive secret underground cache of Russian weapons discovered in Lebanon, and they were positioned for a future attack. Massive quantities of ammunition, armored vehicles, tanks, small arms, heavy weapons, communication devices, and all of which were highly sophisticated paraphernalia was in that cache. 2016, it was reported and affirmed that a new military agreement had been reached, allowing Russian jets to use the airbase in Western Iran for attacks against Syrian rebels. The reason why that's important is that is the first time that foreign military aircraft were allowed to touch down in Iran. So Iran has used that as the means for themselves to solidify their relationship with Russia. Part of that deal was that the Russian jets and the Russian pilots would be used by Iran in training their own pilots. That was part of the program. Now, on the left-hand side, there's a book out called Tehran Rising by Ilian Berman. And this is the quotes from that book. In late 2000, buoyed by its expanding ties with the Kremlin, the Iranian government announced plans for a massive 25-year, let's see now, 2000, so it'd be 2025, national military modernization built almost entirely around Russian technology and weaponry so that they could coordinate their efforts in a future invasion. And then he says Russia has also assisted Iran with its nuclear program. Some of the Russian scientists or in Iran, assisting and helping them. So you see how that starts to play itself out. Now, that's not all. An attempted coup in Turkey sent shockwaves through Turkey and the Middle East. Yeah, this is in our lifetime, guys. Vladimir Putin gave Turkey's President Erdogan a heads up an hour before an attempted coup to escape the immediate danger. So the Russians gave him notice that, it was et tu Brutus, that they're going to kill him and overthrow him so that he could. That's pretty interesting that an outsider knows more than an insider. Erdogan felt left down by NATO allies, including the USA, for not showing sufficient support following the coup attempt. So then U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, he took some time off from his green work, warned the Turks of the inadvisable possibility of standing against Turkish military personnel. In other words, what he's saying is, if the army wants to come in and kill you, you shouldn't prevent them from killing you. That's what he's saying. For actions could have consequences in the NATO alliance. Erdogan called Vladimir Putin my dear friend during a subsequent news conference and pledged close relations for the future, including a military alliance. Now, currently, the standing army in Turkey is about 800,000. So that's currently. So as the time goes by, they're going to increase their efforts. So it's openly apparent that the attempted coup was directed by former Turkish Ayman, founder of the Gulen movement, who now resides in self-imposed exile in Saylorsburg, Pennsylvania. That's in the United States. And U.S. officials have refused to extradite him to fulfill a Turkish demand. So do you think that we're high on Turkish Christmas card list? I don't think we are. And so that draws those that they are going to be drawn to someone who's in world power. So that if it's not the US, then it's Russia. If it's not Russia, it's going to be China, but they're going to be drawn to a power. That's why you see what's happening today with Sweden and Finland wanting to align themselves with NATO because there's safety in those that have, and the have-nots don't want to be the have-nots because it's very dangerous for them. So you see how these things develop and how they take shape. And you know what the prophecy says. It says pretty much what could be a consequence of what's happening today in these alliances. The alliances turn into coalitions. The coalitions turn into mergers. So this is the setup, according to Scripture, of the Northern Confederation. These are the areas that these are the armies they're going to be attacking in the Gog-Magog effort. And then they're going to be wiped out one at a time. Now, here's what Scripture says, how they're going to do that. It tells us that there's going to be a certain amount of soldiers killed by friendly fire. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's going to be sudden disease of a pandemic nature that's going to kill off some of them. There's going to be a volcanic eruption so that fire and brimstone and sulfur are going to be spewed down on some of them. And then there's going to be an earthquake on top of that. So those are the things specifically are mentioned in scripture of how God is going to stop this Northern Confederation from invading Israel. That it's not going to happen. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. So, you know, are they standing alone? No, they're not standing alone. Psalm 121. Somebody read that for me.
Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep.
And who is it that keeps Israel?
God.
Right. Very good. Somebody read Isaiah 54 on the screen.
No weapon that is fashioned against you shall succeed, and you shall refute every tongue that rises against you in judgment. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord. Their vindication from me, declares the Lord.
Yeah. So God is not going to abandon them. This is what we said in the Old Testament, and things haven't changed any at all. So they're not alone. They have God. And this is kind of what it's going to look like in the Gog Magog invasion. It appears that they're totally surrounded. That little sliver of land called Israel is totally surrounded. So here's what it tells us. It tells us that a catastrophic earthquake, this is in Ezekiel 38, is going to cause many troops to die. Transportation is going to be disrupted, and the multinational forces are going to be thrown into chaos because of this earthquake. All right. Then there's going to be the outbreak of friendly fire among the invading troops. And it will probably occur on a large scale, perhaps because communication is going to be difficult due to different languages, Russian, Farsi, Arabic, Turkic. They don't talk the same language. They're not be able to communicate. So when they start calling in firepower, they're going to call it in on themselves and their allies. So they'll kill some of them. Then there's going to be an outbreak of disease, and the recipe for the pandemic is because of the countless numbers of bodies they're going to be left lying around. It tells you in scripture that there's going to be so many bodies that are going to be dead laying around that it takes Israel 7 months to collect all of the bodies and bury all the dead. 7 months. So with the disruption of mobility, it makes it difficult to transfer the wounded and the dead, to bring in medicine and food. So the predatory animals and the birds are going to have quite a feast. In Ezekiel,
That'll be Israel's enemies that are all dead lying around.
I beg your pardon?
Hopefully that'll be the enemies of Israel, the dead bodies.
That's correct. That's correct. Then there's going to be a volcano, and then hailstone fire and burning sulfur is going to rain down on the invaders from the deposits in the region. They're going to be exposed because of the earthquake, and then they're going to be activated. And so they'll shoot up into the atmosphere, volcanic ash and fire, brimstone. So Arnold Fruchtenbaum tells us that the balance of power will collapse with the fall of the Russian forces and her Muslim allies. And this is going to open the way for a one world government. So you see, when this is on the front end, this is following the rapture, but prior to the beginning of the tribulation. This opens the door for the Antichrist to begin his aggressive movement to form a one world government. He forms the government first, and then he tries to put himself into the king's chair of it to be the ruler of all. So take a look at what I just showed you about the Russians over a period of time since 1967 to 2016 and further to 2025 with their alliance with Iran, how those things are shaping. Okay. And then if that invasion happens, what does that do? There's always consequences to it. So that opens up the door for a unification of all governments into a globalization of one world government. So all these things are interrelated to each other. So this is how they line up. Okay, these are the four empires: the Northern Confederation, Kings of the East, Kings of the South, revised Roman Empire. I only put the areas and the countries that are specifically named. Okay, like they're called Put, that's Ethiopia. Gomer is Germany. Those that are specifically named, I put them in there. There's going to be others that are not specifically named. They're going to be tag along to the coalitions. So there's going to be more than this, but this is the heart and soul of the different coalitions. Under the revised Roman Empire, the reason why King 1, 2, and 3 are somewhat faded is because they will cease to be existing. What's going to happen is that King 1 is going to be overthrown by the Antichrist. King 2 will be overthrown by the Antichrist. And then King 3 is he's not going to be overthrown, but he's going to coalesce. He's going to agree to subordinate himself to the Antichrist. Then King 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are going to remain kings of their areas, but they're going to be like board members with the ultimate veto power being the Antichrist. So that's why I kind of graphically faded those guys out for you. Any questions on these?
Dan, doesn't it say that the United States may be part of that revised Roman Empire?
It does not mention the United States at all. Like they're not mentioned anywhere. That could be speculation. Yeah.
Mhm.
If you assume that the United States is going to have some sort of power still remaining, yeah, where would they go? I doubt if they're going to align themselves with Russia. I doubt if they're going to align themselves with China. So it's either going to be the kings of the South or the revised Roman Empire. Probably the revised Roman Empire would be the logical concept, but they're not going to be one of the kings. They're not going to be the number 4 through 10. They're just going to be one of the, if they are merged, they're going to be one of the coalition parties.
Mhm.
In other words, they're not going to be a major factor. They're not going to be a major player. These are the major players right here.
Okay. And the Americas, like you said, the Americas probably won't be any major players on this scenario here.
No, this isn't my scenario. I didn't make this up. Okay. This is what the Bible says.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not smart enough to make all this stuff up. Okay. All right. So what's the point? I mean, why are we going through all these gyrations here? What does it mean? Whoops. Let me go back. Okay. I don't know why that wanted to jump ahead. So what is this telling you right now? What's your great aha right now?
I'm just glad I'll be watching it from heaven.
Yeah, you'll see it on the big screen.
Yes, sir.
All right. So now let's talk about the battle is begin. We go to our details section. I'm trying to give you some graphics so that you can look at the periphery, and when you read it for yourself, you know what you're looking for. So one of the things that shows up in two prominent places, and that's Ezekiel 38 and in the Gospel of John, is a terminology is set up, and it says the last day, latter days, and latter years. And that's a kind of a clue for us if we follow that agenda and identify what those words actually mean. So let's take a look at those. In Ezekiel 38:8, it shows up and says latter years. So we find out that the time prior to the latter days, or the millennial period, the latter days, is the tribulation. So latter years refers to the tribulation. Latter days is in Ezekiel 38:16, means prior to the millennial. In Deuteronomy 4, it says, when thou art in tribulation and all these things come upon thee, even in the latter days. Okay, that's just prior to the millennial period. In Daniel 2:28, it says, what shall be in the latter days? And in Daniel 8:19 and 23, it talks about indignation in the latter time of their kingdom. Latter time is still translated latter days. So we got latter years, which is the time prior to the latter days. So that would be the latter years would be end times in the tribulation. Latter days are the time period. See, the time starts to narrow. You're no longer have 7 years remaining, and that's the time prior to the millennial. And then the last days show up in John 6, 11, and 12, and it's the last day, and it talks about the resurrection and judgment program, the time Israel's glorification and salvation and a blessing. So that is at the end of the tribulation, when God starts judging Israel. You're going to find out in the next lesson, he's going to judge Israel itself, which is going to be not a salvation judgment, because those believers are going to be already saved. It's kind of like the judgment that he makes of the raptured saints. And he's going to judge the Gentiles in the same way. So the last day would be that period of time where these judgments begin to take place. So graphically, I kind of tried to put it for you in the words of the sands of time. You with me on that?
Very good.
Yep.
All right. All right, we'll go back to the Gog Magog and look at our progressive chart here. So the Gog Magog war is the invasion forces encounter supernatural defeat. You can look that up in Ezekiel 38. And it's the Northern Alliance that is destroyed in Ezekiel 39. This is those that are the marching army and their weaponry. Interestingly enough, okay, it tells you later on that Israel will use the weaponry as a mean, the weaponry that was used by the Northern Alliance. They're going to use that as a source of power in Israel, which implies that there's some nuclear weapons that are involved that end up being abandoned in the battleground when the soldiers are killed, and Israel is able to capture those and use that the nucleus of the nuclear weaponry as a means of energy for themselves. And it says that there was enough to take care of Israel for 7 years. What a coincidence, because that's how long the tribulation is. So just thought I'd pass that on to you as an anecdote. Okay, so Gog Magog to the Antichrist peace pact, to the Antichrist entering into Israel, to the Antichrist defying his treaty, abomination of desolation, Antichrist declares he's God, increases in Israel persecution. That comes when Satan is thrown out of heaven. He's thrown out, can no longer gain access in heaven, and he and his demons are thrown out, and he comes back to earth really ticked off. And that's where you have seen in our description in Revelation, where it talks about the woman, and it talks about him in pursuit of her. And that's where the increase in Israel persecution. God tells Israel to run for the hills. It's already in prophecy for them to do that, which the scholar belief is they end up in Petra, because they actually used Petra in a similar fashion before. And then that turns into Megiddo, the Valley of Jehoshaphat, Edom, or the campaign of Armageddon. And then Christ returns with his saints. So that's the first stage of the battle. And it kind of looks like this. The coalition is lined up 1 and 2, and they're invading. That you can see a little explanation on the right-hand side. Russian alliance, Persia, Ethiopia, and so forth. And Ezekiel describes the destruction of the invaders on the mountains of Israel as a result of divine intervention. 7 months is needed to dispose of the dead. 7 years is required to dispose of the debris that will produce energy for Israel. That's in Ezekiel 39, 9 through 10, if you want to look it up. And there's our appearance again, latter days and latter years up here. You guys are becoming prophetic scholars here. Don't you know that?
You're just showing us how much we don't know.
Yeah, really.
Well, now you know. So you can't say that anymore. So this is kind of the unification of Armageddon. So when you think about it, really, the Gog Magog invasion is kind of a dry run, a dress rehearsal for the battles of Armageddon. That's really what it is. And they're at least 7 years apart. All right. So summarize back again in a somewhat of a different fashion for you. Now we go to the battles of the Armageddon campaign. So what you see there, I just want you to notice that there's a lot happening in the tribulation, but it has nothing to do with a unified effort to stamp out the Jews until the extremes. So it's kind of the bookends of the tribulation. And then God does all of his work and activity in between there. Okay. Which, we looked at where he's pouring out the bowls, the natural disasters, a third of the world people are killed. Remember we went through all of those things.
Yeah, Dan, here you're showing where the kings of the south and kings of the east armies opposed the beast.
Right.
And we talked about that earlier on here.
Right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have any questions? You notice where Satan and demons were thrown down from heaven. That's what prompts the increase in Israel's persecution.
Yeah.
So I laid it out this way for you so that you can kind of grasp it. You're going to get these, and so you can study them if you want. Megiddo being the north, Valley of Jehoshaphat, or the Kidron Valley, and then Edom. And that spread is 200 miles long. Okay. The spread, but east to west to the mountains is 100 miles long. So this campaign of Armageddon is over a vast area. It's not just in Megiddo, not just there. And I'm laying them out for you to let you look at each particular area, because each one is different. Not only do they have different physical characteristics, but the battles themselves, or the confrontation themselves, are going to be different. And then Edom to the south, which we're describing as Petra. So this is kind of a 30,000 foot view of Armageddon, east, west, and so forth. And, you think about it, it's not, I find it very interesting that this sets up in a similar fashion to what Putin is doing, or what he attempted to do in the Ukraine. Okay. If you notice that when he invaded them, what he did was he came from Russia himself and he went east to west. And then he jumped in from the north and started invading from the north. And then his navy went from the south to cut off the port cities and stuff. And this is going to be a similar strategy here. The Roman Empire, revised Roman Empire, will be coming from the west. And what they're going to do is they're going to seize the ports, the Mediterranean ports, to prevent commerce from happening and prevent the support of weaponry to Israel. The one that's coming from the south is coming to cut off the escape route, because remember I told you they're going to Petra? Well, they're going to try to cut off the escape route. Coming from the east is the massive invasion of the Asiatics, which is China. And in order for them to make that route, they have to dry up the Euphrates, which is going to happen. And then they could physically move in. And then from the north, the remainder of the coalition of the northern tribes will come in from that direction. So it's not far removed from the strategy that Putin initially started with. And you cut off their food supply because they can't import and export things. When Putin tried to cut off Odessa and I think it's the Black Sea, is it not, from Ukraine, it was also to cut off Ukraine exporting any of the wheat and things that they make, because 50% of the food supply in Africa comes from Ukraine. Okay, so here comes Jesus to the rescue. So I want to just see his movements here. Hang on just a second. Let me catch up with you. Okay, all right. So here's what's going to happen. Scripture says that Jesus is going to return to the Mount of Olives, to the place that he left when he ascended into heaven. So he's going to start there. And what's going to happen is when he comes back to the Mount of Olives is going to split in half by an earthquake. And that earthquake is going to create a shift in the mountain going from north to south. So it's going to change the configuration, and it has a ripple effect on the surrounding land for hundreds of miles. All right. So Jesus is going to be on the Mount of Olives, and he returns to the same spot where he originally ascended, Zechariah 14 and Acts 1. Then what he's going to do is he's going to enter Jerusalem from the east. And it's really kind of interesting because the gate that he's going to enter into Jerusalem has been boarded up. What's happened is that they have covered it with stones and cemented it in, thinking that was going to keep him out. That was during one of the wars that the battles that Israel had to fight. So that's not going to keep him out, by the way. He'll be enter. So he's going to go in to Jerusalem to confront the armies that have penetrated and are occupying Jerusalem themselves. That's where he's going to start. Okay. So he's going to enter the city on horseback, and he's going to destroy the Antichrist forces that have seized Jerusalem in Zechariah 12. Once he's done that, then he's going to turn his attention south. So he's going to head south, and he's going to ride to annihilate the Antichrist, the false prophet, and their remaining military might who had come there in Basra and Petra to wipe out all the Jews once and for all. Joel, Zechariah, and Revelation is where you find that. Okay, so the ones that are crucial and critical, he's going to get first, and then he's going to go after those that have the responsibility of cutting off the exit of the Jews, and then what do you think he's going to do? He's going to turn his efforts back again. So let's look at the summary here. Mount of Olives to Jerusalem, Jerusalem to Petra, Petra back to Megiddo. So they'll finish the battles in Megiddo. But the three places are going to be in that progressive order. And it's no reason to go into it right now because that's next week's lesson. Next week's lesson is on the 75. When we first started these lessons, 9 lessons ago, on one of my screens, I had on there a question, and it said, what is the 75? Has anybody found it out, or did anybody even notice it?
75 days.
That's correct.
75 days, yeah.
What is the 75 days?
Not sure. I just heard that there's 75 the emphasis in the first 75 days into the millennium.
Yeah.
But I
The,
don't know what it's all about.
there's an interim period between the end of the Armageddon battle and the beginning of the millennial. And it is in two increments, a 30-day increment and a 45-day increment, which adds up to 75 days. Okay. So there's going to be certain things that Jesus is going to do during that 75 days to prepare the planet for the millennium. And we're going to talk about that next week. So I don't want to cut myself off here by giving you the next week's lesson this week. All right. So after disposing of the forces of evil in Petra, he's going to go north to attack the enemy forces in Megiddo. With sin comes great deception, and armies of the earth who are lured by three powerful demons are rendezvous at Megiddo. So what happens is that all the remaining forces, after all these things happen, those that are still alive of the opposing forces all gather themselves at Megiddo. And so Jesus is in pursuit of them, and that's where the final battle takes place. And the
Hey, Dan.
birds will fill their bellies with flesh. Yes.
I guess in Revelation that it portrays this as the three frogs, right?
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah.
The three frogs that have evil spirits that gather there.
That's the three demons. Yeah, that's very good.
Okay.
Yeah, way to go. That's pretty good association. All right. So let's look at I gave you my 2 cents worth there. So well, where happened to you this slide? I'm missing a slide here. Yeah, I am missing a slide. I don't know why I erased that, but I did. I'll try to insert that back again. Oh, I know what it is. That's the slide for the 75 days. I'm looking at a different screen than you guys are. So at this period of time now, we've had two battles, one being a conflict that God took care of himself by natural disasters and internal confusion, so to speak, the enemies. But by the way, if you really get time somewhere somehow, these 4 ways that God kills off the Gog Magog invasion, each one of those has been used before to defend Israel, but not all at one time. Just at 4 different times, God has used natural disasters, so to speak. And confusion amongst the troops is one of the things that God uses where they kill each other.
Is that on Gideon?
Yeah.
When he came over and helped Gideon, the enemies that were going to attack Gideon, he had a small army.
Yeah, the only thing we're missing is we're missing the choir. We're missing the worship band, like they had at Jericho. You know, they put the singers up front with the band and the soldiers behind, and he marched around the city. He didn't use a band in this particular time, so we missed that part of it. Okay, so we're back to stop sharing. Okay, now, so what is all this told you? What it's told you is that, I hope, what it's told you is that there's a twofold thing that's going on here. Okay, one is that as we enter the period of time that we're going to be dealing with, starting with the rapture and then going to the Gog Magog and progressing through the tribulation to the 75 days and so forth, is God is fulfilling 200 unfulfilled prophecies from the Old Testament in this period of time. So a lot of some of these things in the way that they're set up and the journey is because he is faithful to his word. And when there's prophecy that was given to the Jews, God's going to fulfill that. And so he's paying attention to detail, and he lines up the chronology and the progression of it to be able to do that. One thing leads to another, especially when things really get rolling here. One thing will lead to another. So God is fulfilling the promises that he gave to Israel. And the tribulation is all about Israel now. It is all about Israel going from unbelief to belief at the final. Jesus said in the New Testament, in the Gospels, I'm not coming back until you invite me, talking to the Pharisees. So they have to be at a stage of belief. Remember, the church is gone. It's now left to Israel, and they have to reach a stage of belief, which means that the believers, the Jewish believers, Messianic Jews, has to outnumber the unbelieving Jews. And then Jesus comes back to what? He comes back to have the marriage feast with his bride. So you see that progressing. You see the amount of detail that he goes to. You see how all these backstories and so forth are intertwined into a great cosmic battle that goes on. There's a battle that's going on in heaven where Satan is kicked out. He's given then the battle of the armies that come together against. I mean, this is, script writers couldn't write this out. There's no way. You couldn't make this story up, the way God does that. So it's a big story, and there's a lot of events. You who is going to be raptured, why do you need to know these things? Let's just start there. Why do you think you need to know? Why is it important for you to know?
Well, to me is the fact that, I mean, we can see what's going to happen, and we know that we're not going to be part of that. But to me is just basically to warn people, unbelievers that are still, being unbelievers, and being able, in a gentle way, to present this picture that if you don't accept Christ and his salvation, you're subjected to this kind of destiny.
Hey, that's a good one. Any other reasons? Any other motivations? What do you think?
Well, Dan, I think that it gives the believer confidence to live through the things that we're going to live through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, what I just told you about him fulfilling his prophecies, that you got a faithful God here. He's not going to abandon. He's going to do what he says he's going to do. So you know what that means? That means that the Bible is a lot more valuable than people think it is. Because if you want to know what's going on, look it up. It's an open book test.
Yeah. Well, to me, when I read some of these these early books, it seems like all these prophecies, they are there, but at the time that I went through until up to now, when you point out the verses that talks about that prophecy, it sort of, to me, it was like buried, when I went through it.
Yeah.
And now, that you mentioned these details, and it fits everything together, and it's backed up by scripture, by verses, and Ezekiel, Isaiah, and so on. And first time I read Isaiah, obviously had a semi-understanding what he was saying, but not all the details that's in there, and also in Ezekiel and other prophets,
I hope that we're successful in connecting the dots here
Yeah.
so that you can kind of get a better feel for what God is actually doing. Anybody else?
Well, mine is just a simplistic approach that just keep your focus on Jesus and realize that there's going to be other things out here that are going to try to lead you astray, that the Antichrist is going to try to convince you that he's God. And that you just, it's a world full of scam right now. And it's always has been and it always is. So just keep your focus on Jesus, keep reading your Bible every day, and be aware that there's going to be a lot of things that are going to try to lead you astray. And this all teaches you exactly what to help you to figure out what to look for.
Thank you, Frank. Dave, what about you, buddy?
Yeah, we did a little study this morning in our FCA group, and one of the things we talked about, the leader talked about, was the resolve of Daniel when he first refused to eat the king's food and drink the king's wine. And so, the importance is that we have to be resolved and know where we stand and know what we believe in terms of, Jesus and Son of God and died for us and so forth, so that when things happen, when we're challenged, when we're persecuted, as things are getting worse all the time, it seems like we are solid, we are resolved to stand where we are and not give in, to the world today.
Yeah, that's good, Dave. Norm, you got anything to throw in?
Well, I wanted to say, this is, to me, is just fascinating. It's so informative and so interesting. I told you I've been reading the 2 books on the end of times, and then we had Rich's presentation. So it's all starting to gel, and it just convinces you. It deepens your faith, first of all, and it convinces you that the Bible is a book of truth. And all the prophecies, I tried to convince the people, there are like 600 prophecies in the Old Testament, and what 300 were fulfilled when Jesus came, and now I was always wondering when are the other prophecies going to be fulfilled, and now I have a much better understanding of it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, good. How about you, Little Bill? You got your mute on there, buddy. Little Bill, you got your mute on. We can't hear you. There you go. Now you can talk. Now you can talk.
I guess better late than ever. I won't make excuses. I'm just glad to join you. Good to see everybody. Good to hear you. A couple of questions because I missed entirely last week and much of this today. Where are we presently timeline in relation to the coming events? Because I'm sure you've been telling us that the events are unraveling around us. And the pieces of the puzzle, the players are there. We may not know who they are exactly, but they're there. Is all this lining up?
Frank, tell him.
Well, we don't know. It's been, this scenario can be played out probably hundreds of times over the past centuries. There's always somebody screwing somebody else, wars and stuff going on. You just got to keep waiting and praying and observing, and we're just not going to know. I don't know. We're not going to know. Just keep your focus on Jesus and you're going to be fine.
What did it say in one of them? To look up.
I'm not worried about it. And there are people that may be worried about it because I strongly believe I know where I am and where I'm going to be.
Amen.
We've got, around the areas that you've been talking about geographically, Russia has got to be one of the players. China, you've probably already mentioned these, and when I wasn't tuned in, the major players over there that we've been dancing around, if you will, or dancing with, or whatever, holding hands, trying to, Iran, Iraq, they're all there. And they've raised their ugly heads from time to time and still doing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the major players right now, it looks like, and aren't those the ones that basically you've identified, Dan, in your studies? Those countries?
Yeah, there's no question about it. Yeah. I mean, you saw the list.
Yeah.
Those are all familiar names that are in the headlines all the time. So, yeah. Yeah. So, it appears that things are ripe. Let's put it that way. And, but there's been different times in history where they appeared ripe also there. So it just seems to me, what I see is I see so many things converging that I think they take it beyond the realm of coincidence. So that's what I think. What do I know? I'm not going
Say
to be
that
here.
again, Dan. You
I'm
see
not going to
what?
be here anymore.
Yeah. Say that again. You see what? No. I don't have my hearing aid in.
Oh, okay. So you've been running track. That's why you don't have your name, right? Dave, here's a recruit here for you, man. Put him on the marathon team. What I see is a lot of things that are coming together, like coalitions and the rise and the fall of the different powers to be. And I see so many of those things happening that I think it's beyond the realm of coincidence. Therefore, to me, anyway, I think we're beginning to go in that direction. How long it's going to be, I don't know. I did a lesson with you guys on numbers, and in that lesson it said 2017 to 2027. So, that's a possibility. Let me just say this. Every day I'm reminded, don't buy any green bananas today, All right, guys. So I think next week is the 75 days. And then the week following that is, what is the millennium going to look like? What is it when you're going to be there with Jesus Christ? What's it going to look like? And one of the questions that we're going to talk about is there going to be sin present? And if there is, why is there going to be sin present?
During the millennium, right?
During the millennium, yeah.
Millennium.